Welcome to the Create or Die podcast. I am happy to be here with my special guest, artist extraordinaire, chibi artist, comic artist, visual development artist, Derek Laufman. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing good. I'm super excited to talk to you. I think it's pretty crazy. I'm 27, so I kind of grew up on DeviantArt, and so like guys like you and Cheeks, Eric Canetti, I grew up in middle school looking at you guys as art, so it feels pretty cool to be able to finally talk to you after following your work for so many years.
That's really cool.
Um, I guess I listened to a couple of podcasts with you, and just if you could give an overview of your life before we go into like more specific questions, I think for people who maybe don't know you, it could be helpful to understand where you're coming from.
Okay. So I'm born in Burlington, Ontario, which is about an hour and a half away from Toronto. And let's see. So I grew up drawing like pretty much as early as I can remember. Um, I was big into GI Joe, so I was drawing like tanks and explosions and that kind of stuff growing up. And let's see. So like, yeah, I was the kid who drew in class all the time instead of paying attention. Um, I probably had some sort of like undiagnosed like ADHD or something to a degree, but it was my way of like staying focused in class because I found that like I had a really hard time focusing on what the teacher had to say. So if I was
Mm-hmm.
kind of had a pencil to paper and just kind of doodled, it kind of just allowed me to like sit there quietly, you know. And yeah, so like it was just pretty much that. I was kind of known as like one of the kids who could draw in the school. There's like a few of us that were sort of like, you get into high school and people ask you to do their cover for their CD for their band and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. And I think like around, let's say like late high school, like the internet and message boards and things were kind of taken off. And I kind of, I went on digital webbing was like a big one for me. I don't know if you remember that one. There was Pencil Jack, digital webbing. Lead Heavy had their own little one with Scotty Young's faction there.
Yeah, I remember that
Um,
one.
yeah, but I was pretty much on digital webbing for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
and got a few little comic-y jobs off of there, just little indie things like people dreaming. We were all kind of dreaming back then. Spent a lot of time like sort of like either in my room drawing, fantasizing about being a comic artist one day. I had a friend who was into drawing, and so we'd go to his house and we'd be in his basement drawing for hours and inking and like learning all the sort of trying to figure it out. Um, I was a big Image Comics guy. It was sort of Image hit when I was I think like 14, 15. I just pretty much started high school. There was a new
Wow.
comic shop that opened across from my high school. So it was kind of the prime sort of like I'd
Dang.
never really been exposed to a lot of comics before then.
Yeah.
But it was the kind of the perfect storm, and I was Image had just kind of came out when all the number ones were kind of hitting. It was a nice entry point because for a kid who's still I was digging comics, but Marvel felt like a daunting thing. DC, like you had like issues like 200 and like 80, and like I'm like I don't know where to start. I didn't have a lot of money, so I was like, where can I start? So like Image Comics were like, I'm like, I can start number one on all these issues that were kind of coming out. And so I think that just kind of like hooked me right away. And the art was like, eye catching and,
Yeah.
really, really just like drew me in. And I think like half the time I bought the comics, I didn't even read them. I just was like flipping through for the art, like try to copy, you know what I mean? Like it was just,
Yeah.
it was so funny. I was so fascinated by art, and I ignored a lot of the writing. I was kind of just like I don't know, probably the fact that like I was like a little slow in school and reading wasn't really my thing, and
Yeah.
but the art spoke to me. um, yeah, so like Image Comics was a big deal for me, and that's kind of really I think when Image Comics came out and I started to see some of the young talent that was sort of popping into Image here and there. You'd hear about like a 20-year-old getting a job, and I was probably like 15 at the time, 16. And that idea of like, wow, like, a professional job could only be a few years away, sort of just
Yeah.
like really fed into my fantasy of like being a comic artist, moving to the States. Like that was the dream back then. And the comics back then were selling so much. Like it was like,
Yeah.
Image Comics were selling like crazy. The comics industry was booming, seemed like a, industry to get into. But then that kind of crumbled as I got out of, like, probably finished high school. I think that's when the dip happened.
Yeah.
So I ended up, still wanting to do comics. It was still a dream of mine. Um, and we had Sheridan College. It's a pretty decent art school. It was just in Oakville, and it was only about 30 minutes from my house, like not too
Mhm.
bad in Burlington. And so they offered an illustration program that was pretty regarded, and an animation program. And I took I didn't have a great portfolio coming out of high school. My art teacher was very art history focused, and
Mm.
it didn't really gel with me. Um,
Yeah.
and so I didn't really develop like a big portfolio. He kind of poo pooed like comic art and stuff like that. I think he was just kind of a bit of an art snob when it came to like, the art history side of things, and
Hmm.
didn't really, I wouldn't say he did a good job at like nourishing my sort of like, desire to draw what I wanted to draw.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so anyway, they offered a program called like Art Fundamentals, which was like a sort of like a way to build a portfolio, and it gave you a little taste of everything from photography to sculpting
Oh wow.
to illustration to a little bit of animation. So it was a nice little like beginner course for people, and you could build a portfolio. So however, my first year of, college, I was a little bit like, oh, like I'm going to party all the time.
Yeah.
And, all my friends were partying and stuff. So I came out of there with not a great portfolio. So again, I'm like, high school didn't have a great portfolio. Come out of this other art program I spent a bunch of money on, didn't have a great portfolio. Kind of a low point in my life. I wanted to get into illustration at the time. I didn't think I had a chance at animation. And I thought illustration was the sort of path to comics, so that's why I was sort of gearing towards that.
Mm.
Um, and not getting in, kind of like, it was depressing. I kind of hit like a bit of a low point in my life. I was about 20 now. I didn't have a good portfolio. Didn't know what I was going to do. And I ended up taking. They offered at Sheridan part-time courses, and because I didn't get into illustration, I started to think, well, maybe I am more cartoony. Maybe animation's kind of the way to go. So I took these part-time courses that were a little more geared towards like animation, like layout course. There was like
Mm.
a watercolor course. There was a life drawing course. So like I took a few of these, and then that started to help me build a portfolio finally. So yeah, so then I was able to get into the animation program. That was great. I came in at a time when the animation industry kind of started to crumble. It was right around the time Pixar had exploded onto the scene with Toy Story, made a bunch of money,
Hmm.
and a lot of the 2D animation studios were shutting down.
Yeah.
So my year was pretty much like, you had all the 90 kids, 96 kids that were like devastated that this industry is like starting to fall apart
Yeah.
as you're like right in school. You're staring down all these like, student debts and all these things, and you're like, oh, I gotta finish out 3 years. It was a 3-year course at the time, and you start kind of like doing the math, and kids were getting kind of worried about what it was going to be. And lo and behold, when we graduated, there was no jobs. I think like
Damn.
it used to be like, I think it was over 50% of the people would go get jobs after our graduating class, maybe higher. And by the time we graduated, I think out of the 80 kids that graduated, I think maybe 3 or 4 got jobs right away, and the rest kind of went into like flash animation. There's a few little kind of crappy studios that were hiring, but they weren't paying much. I didn't want to do animation, so I was going to do comics. I was quite
Mm. Okay.
like sort of like comfortable being like, I'm all good. Like I'm going to be in comics. And at the time, I'd started to get some stuff going with a indie publisher who was making deals with Image Studio based on like a project I was working on with them.
Hmm.
The project got picked up by Image. We were all set to, I guess, have my first book published by Image by the point in time. I guess it would have been like 23,
Okay.
24. And super hyped about that. And we had they had hired Liquid, who was coloring at the time for Joe Mad, to do the coloring on the book. And I was just like, so like I was on cloud nine at this point. And then this like anvil drops on me when the publisher, I don't know exactly what happened. I never got the full story, but they cut me out of the project,
Whoa.
and kind of changed the name of the book. And they got rid of Liquid, got rid of me. A friend of mine who was co-writing and helping with some backgrounds on the book, got rid of him. I think my understanding was that maybe they had paid us too much or agreed to pay us too much because they were throwing money at us, pretty like a lot of money at the
Yeah.
time. And I think that they were kind of told like by the Image Studio that the budget wasn't going to work or something. I don't know what it was, but um, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, so I won't name names. But they brought in another artist who's still working today, who took over the book.
Damn.
Um, and even just like I saw a couple of those first pages, I'm like, those are just like the pages. Like it was like, oh, it was tough. It was tough. I was devastated. I was a kid up in Canada. I had student debt. I did not even like fathom like how I could go about like pursuing legal action for like
Yeah.
my idea kind of getting stolen, getting kind of scooped up from under me.
Yeah.
I just basically quit comics at that point. I was just like, I'm done with this industry. Just
Damn.
because at the time too, there wasn't a lot of like outlets for self publishing
Hmm.
or um, avenues. Like it was pretty much like at the time, it was like you needed to go to one of the big guys. Like that was
Hmm.
kind of like the in, if you want to make a living. And so I was just like, and it was so hard to get to that point. I'd been sort of clawing my way along, trying to find a job, like, in the comics industry. And that was going to be my big break.
Hmm.
Um, at least so that's what I thought. So it just didn't work out that way. And so then I basically got a job just like doing graphic design at a shoe company. They didn't sell, it wasn't great shoes. It's like women's shoes and men's shoes and stuff. Doing like just, the only good thing that came out of it was I got to work on a computer. I didn't have a lot of exposure to computer and like computer coloring and stuff like that. So it was sort
Yeah.
of a nice little job to kind of get me doing there. My wife was working in customer service at the place and they need a graphic designer. And she's like, well, my husband does art and he could do
Nice.
this stuff. So kind of just got me a job, like at least getting paid to do something art related, even though it wasn't what I wanted to do.
Were you
Um,
married going through a lot of this stuff? Had you already been married?
no, we were together. We got together. We met my end of my second year of college,
Okay.
and yeah. So then she was with me during the whole like fall of the Image stuff.
Yeah.
She was living with me at the time. We were living at my parents' house actually, and but yeah. So like we didn't get married till late, but we were together for like 5 years before we got married. So she got to go through that with me and to
Yeah.
the ups and downs.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that because that's like a side that a lot of people don't talk about, and I'm kind of like you. Like I met my wife. Whoa, I think I was 20, and I had just started kind of getting back into art, and like you, went through a lot of like pretty disheartening stuff, and that's the side of it that like I think a lot of people don't see is the like the personal struggle of trying to get your foot in the door on the other side of like the professional. It can be really really tough, and like the person who's with you has to put a lot of faith that you're giving it your all and that you're going to pull through because like you said you're living with your parents. And so was that something that like going through it was that like an extra thing that motivated you to try and like pull this off and make it work to like bring your personal life together, or was it a struggle?
Um, well, it was certainly. I mean, I knew I knew I was going to do something art related because I didn't really feel I had any other skills. It was kind of like I
I
have
feel
to
it.
do something with art.
Hmm.
And I had the odd like jobs and things like that. I worked at like a Winners. I don't know if you guys have Winners in the States, but I think it's like Marshalls. You guys have
Oh
Marshalls?
yeah, yeah, yeah. We have
It
that for sure.
is. Yeah, it's just like one of those. But I worked at like a dollar store, and I worked at
Hmm.
crappy jobs trying to make it work. But ultimately, I'm like, I have to do something with art. Like, I really
Yeah.
didn't. It was all I ever wanted to do. And having that graphic design job, although like again, it wasn't great, at least showed me, okay, I can kind of use my skills to apply to some form of art.
Hmm.
Um, and my wife was like so supportive, like always like
Mm.
follow your dreams. It was never like she would never ever, tell me to quit and go find something else to do. Like it was never. She knew what I wanted to be. She knew what
Yeah.
my parents were the same way. Like I never,
Nice.
those people that grew up with parents that like didn't support their art. Like I mean, I
Yeah.
can't even. We were
Imagine it.
poor. We're a poor family. I was on welfare for a good part of my life.
Oh
Like
wow.
yeah, like it was like, but my parents were never like, you need to go get a job. And like, I mean, I got like paper routes and stuff like that to kind of like, make ends meet, buy those comics and stuff like that. And, it's like, the, but yeah, like I was lucky. I was fortunate in that regards,
That's good.
and so yeah, my wife always super supportive. So what happened was, so I worked at that shoe company for about 2 years, and I
Mm.
hated it. I really did. I was
Oh.
like, I was having anxiety about going to work. I'd be like taking sleeping pills on Sunday night because it was like Monday came and I was like not be able to sleep. I was having like insomnia over it.
Damn.
I just hated it. Like I hated it so much. I didn't like the people that worked there. Like the bosses were not good. It was an
Damn.
interesting sort of for me to see the corporate world and how like some of these CEOs would treat their employees, and it was the kind of a weird, like I would see other grown men getting like you know torn down in front of a big room full of people, like in a board meeting,
Yeah.
and like just being like humiliated, and just like a weird like corporate culture that was kind of there. And it really just like, as an artist, I was like, I don't want anything to do with this, shit at all. It was
Yeah.
like not can we swear, by the way? I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
know. Okay, yeah. So like I'm watching my P's and Q's. Yeah. So I think that gave me a lot of perspective on what I didn't want to do. Even more so, it reinforced like I do not want to be in a corporate world. I don't
Mm.
want anything to do with this shit. Like I
Yeah.
want, I'm going to do something with art. So um, they end up like the CEO knew I wasn't happy. He's like, "You're not happy here." He might have recognized that like I didn't want, like I wanted to do art. Like I didn't want to just do this graphic design crap.
Yeah.
And he fired me. It was like the best thing. I was so happy. He was like, getting fired. I've never been happy. I was like, because it was one of those things. Like I was just, my wife and I at the time, we just put some money down on a condo, and she had left that place and was working in Toronto,
Mm.
and so we were sort of like, I needed the money, so I didn't want to quit, but I didn't want to be there, and there wasn't a lot, and there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities kind of showing themselves, but when I kind of had that, when I got fired, the I really kind of like started to sort of go like, okay, I'm going to try to find something else that's more in my wheelhouse, so to speak. Still like, and we had put the money down the condo, so I couldn't go too far outside of like, my area in
Hmm.
Burlington. Happened to see a job opening in London, Ontario, which is about an hour and a half from there, for a video game studio called Big Blue Bubble,
Okay.
and they were just starting up. They're a pretty big studio now. They did My Singing Monsters, is kind of like their smash hit,
Okay.
and so at the time they were just a ragtag studio. I think there was like 15 employees at the time, and they were doing like some GBA games. They were doing cell phone games back before iPhones were a thing,
Wow.
like those little like flip phone games and stuff.
Yeah.
They're doing that stuff, but it was like, when I got to go to that studio, that was like so eye opening, because it was just like, oh, these are all like kids my age. We were all
Yeah.
like mid 20s, mid to late 20s, into video games. Like I'm like, oh, these are more my people,
Yeah.
into comics, into like that stuff. And so that kind of like rekindled. I'm like, okay, finally, I'm like in an industry that fits me a little better.
Hmm.
So I spent like about 5 years there, and it certainly had its ups and downs. I was working on games that I didn't like. By the end of it, we were working on a lot of like casual games that were geared towards like older women. There was a bit of a before iPhone sort of really took off, there was kind of like the flash game market was sort of a big deal, and
Hmm.
middle-aged women were starting to like play games on their computers. So
Really?
yeah, it was like a
What
little like
platforms were these? Was it Facebook? Like the Facebook games?
yeah,
Like
there was some Facebook stuff, but it was just like you could go onto a flash. It was like I think it was called Big Fish or something. It was called. It was a
okay,
flash game site. You put games on there, and you can make money through ads and like different things like that. It was kind of like a
wow,
weird little model that was going back then. And anyway, so I was stuck making these games. I was sort of like head of their casual division. I kind of like climbed a few steps and like wasn't doing a whole like I was doing art, but I was like managing people and doing
yeah,
that kind of thing, and art directing and designing and stuff like that for games. But it was games I didn't want to do because it was like games that weren't really for me. I'm
yeah,
like a 30-year-old dude, and I'm trying to design games for older women. And yeah. So anyway, so I quit there, and I eventually started a game studio with a friend of mine who had also quit that company. We just did like a 2-man thing for about 5 years. We struggled through that. It was kind of during the iPhone boom of like
yeah,
iPhone games.
yeah,
And being in that, we did that indie thing where we worked like this before I had kids. And my wife was working pretty much supporting like us for the like supporting me for the most part,
yeah,
for a lot of it. Like we made a few dollars here and there off a couple things, but it was nothing really took off.
yeah,
We struggled. It was a fun time, but that was like that was the hardest because we had like a house by that point in London, and had a mortgage to pay.
yeah.
And um
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about
sure thing.
something? Because the game company was one thing I definitely wanted to ask you about, but also I wanted to ask about the job you had at the game company because going from being like a graphic designer to assuming an artist at the original game studio, and then you said you were moving up into like kind of the managing people role. For a lot of people that even if they're working on something that they like, the fact that they're not drawing and the fact that they're maybe managing people a lot more, do you feel like you would have stayed if the projects were things that you liked, even if you weren't drawing as much? Or do you kind of feel like the making of art was always something like you really felt like you needed to do to be fulfilled?
Um, I would say probably more towards the end.
Hmm.
I felt that way, like where the
Okay.
art, the art was suffering. I felt like my art was suffering because I wasn't drawing as much, especially I wasn't drawing the things I wanted to draw.
Yeah.
Um, and I wasn't like inspired.
Yeah.
That was a big thing as well. Just like the not being inspired as an artist. Like I'd go home and I'd play video games. I wouldn't draw.
Yeah.
Like I wasted a lot of time. Like I felt like later, like playing a lot of like World of Warcraft and
Yeah.
things like that, and I would, it's like hours and hours at that game, and it's like I could have been drawing and working on a comic or something when I was at home, but instead
Yeah.
I took kind of the lazy route.
Yeah.
Because you draw all day at work or whatever, and you come home. But it was interesting. Like I guess one thing I can add, like when I first started that place, it was kind of a funny story because they needed a pixel artist,
Hmm.
and I didn't know what the hell a pixel was. Like I didn't understand. Like I was like, I could draw on a computer. Like, is that what you mean? Like I didn't like when I did an art test, like a pixel art test, and I sent to the guy, to the art director, and I mean credit to him. He didn't like just laugh and like throw it away because I was just like I painted really small. He was like I had to submit this like 360 pixel by 240 pixel like scene they wanted me to do,
Mm.
and I painted it so small on the computer like an idiot. Like I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Like
Yeah.
I was such an idiot, and they're like, no, no, no. They sent me some samples later. Like, this is pixel art. It's like this, and I'm like, okay, and I kind of did it. It wasn't great, but they saw my portfolio, and I had a decent looking portfolio. So I think they were just like, you can draw, so we'll figure out the pixel art stuff. And they ended up teaching it to me. So I was animating in pixel art on my
Mm.
first job because I had the animation background.
Yeah.
So It was a game called like Atomic Betty for GBA. It was like my first game,
Oh, like the
and I was
TV show?
a TV show. Yeah,
Oh no way! I used to love that show.
yeah, it was a pretty cool show. I got to watch them all like on like I remember they gave us like a CD-ROM had all the episodes on it because they had to reference it for all the moves and
Ah, that's
different animations and
sick.
stuff. Yeah, it was fun. So yeah, it was kind of crash course in pixel animation back then. Um, but yeah, I mean, to answer your question, like it's like I think eventually I would have, I didn't really like managing people. Like
Yeah,
I could do it, but it wasn't really my thing. Like I didn't like, telling people they had to work overtime, like, especially in the games
yeah.
industry when you're like, people want to go home and you're like, we got to get this done. And sorry, this sucks. And by the way, we're not getting any extra money for it.
Damn.
And, you might get a day off after doing like a weeks of overtime. Like it was, it was kind of gross. I mean, it was just that was the games industry, especially then. I mean, it's still pretty crappy, I guess, for a lot of people in the games
Yeah.
industry where they deal with that shit. But it's like, yeah, but I think, you know, at least, for the most part, like there was projects that I did enjoy working on and like, here and there. And I did get to sort of flex a little bit on a few things and kind of maybe try some different styles and things like that. I was always, especially growing up, like, or I mean, in my early, like I say, late 20s, early to mid 30s, I was a bit of a chameleon artist where I could
Mm,
sort of like, if you needed it to look a certain way, I could get you kind of there.
yeah.
And that was something I kind of hung my hat on for getting jobs because, I, as much as I would love to have had my own style at the time, a lot of the comic artists I looked up to, like Scotty Young and stuff, had their distinct styles, like Cheeks. Those are guys I really looked up to. And I wanted to be like them. They had a really distinct look to their work, and I didn't really feel like I had that in mind. But at the same time, I kind of like said to myself, well, at least this way, I could go to an art studio, get a job because I can go like, hey, I can do this kind of like breadth of styles, and you can throw me on multiple projects, and I can kind of fill in gaps and different things like that. I'm kind of more versatile, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And so but once I quit that job, just I mean, would I have stayed there if it was better? If it was a better scenario, like maybe. But I don't know. Just things that were happening at the time there at the studio. There, we'd gone through like mass layoffs, and I wasn't one of the
Mm,
people that got laid off. But I saw a lot of friends getting laid off, and it was devastating to see like friends like you know that you really were close to getting canned here and there, and that was tough. That was rough, and it made the industry feel unstable as well. Like and it
damn.
was like I kind of didn't have faith in that. And my wife and I were thinking about having kids at the time, so I was like, is this really industry to be in? So for security, I went and started my own studio, and suffered for 5 years. So it wasn't
Damn.
like it's not like I went to like these greener pastures. I went into probably like less, like more rocky terrain. But so during the time like when I had my own studio, it was called Halfbot, and we did put out a few games. Like I said, we made a few bucks. It wasn't like anything to like really hang our hat on. We were able to get like a grant to work on a game. We had our sights set on this big, massive like Metroidvania platformer
Yeah.
um, game, and
It's the bullet one.
Bullet Age. Yeah,
Bullet
that was
age.
Bullet
Yeah.
Age, and it was way too much. It was way too much for us to. We bit off more than we could chew,
Mm.
for sure. It was a lot because there was two of us. It was a programmer, and then there was me. So it was doing all the art.
Oh
It was
wow.
just two of us for the most part. We brought in um, Ryan Carlson to do music, who actually went on to do all the music for Hilda, the animated
Oh
series.
wow.
Yeah, he's a super talented guy. We were so lucky to have him on the game, like working with us and stuff. And he was just kind of up and coming in that sort of like entertainment space. And
Yeah.
so it was really cool to see him like flexing his musical muscles on that game and stuff. But we were just, it was for two people, the game was too daunting. And we sort of, we got ourselves into hot water where we're like, this game's going to be another year, maybe two. And we were broke. Like we were both
Mm.
like, and I had a kid on the way at that point. Um, and I needed to really like, I was working So I would do. Oh man, I would get to my friend's house. So Melvin, who was the programmer, I'd go to his house. I'd drive across town, go to his house at like 9 in the morning. My wife was working usually a late shift at the bank. She was a manager at the bank, like a call center. So she'd work till like 10 at night. So she would like take a bus to work. I would be at my friend's house with the car. I'd be there working usually in the morning till like about 1 o'clock. I'd work on like freelance stuff. I picked up a few freelance gigs in the gaming
Mm-hmm.
industry, doing like just odd jobs and stuff to kind of like that would kind of like help pay the bills. I might make like, you know, 200-300 bucks that day, like, just doing freelance stuff. And then I would like be working till on our game at my buddy's house until like 10 at night. And then I'd go pick up my wife from work. And I did that for like 3 years. Like it was
Yeah.
like, a lot. It was crazy hours. Like, it was pretty much, I was out of my house like for, yeah, like from like 8 in the morning till like 11 at night most days. It was just like, it was grueling. It was grueling, but you're
Yeah.
trying to make it work. You're trying to get your dream of like, getting a hit game or whatever. But eventually you just have to realize like, we need to get real jobs here,
Yeah.
and this is kind of like the time when I'm not sure exactly when this was, but I started to. Okay, so during the time I was working at Halfbot, Sean Galloway had reached out to me,
Oh wow.
and he needed some help with. He was doing a book for a Warcraft book, World of Warcraft, is Pearls of
Mm.
Pandaria, and he was going to be doing a graphic novel. It was a big book, 124 pages, something like that, and he needed help with layouts, just because he had like a lot of workload to juggle, and he was bringing on like me and a couple other guys. It was the plan to like do these layouts for the book,
Mm-hmm.
and I took it on because like I had been sort of wanting to get back into comics. I was sort of like it was probably 36, 37, I think at the time, and I was really wanting to get back into comics, and this was kind of a great opportunity to sort of get my toes in the water
Yeah.
again. And so I was excited, and I mentioned to you like I was a big Warcraft sort of fan, so
Yeah.
it sort of worked out that like I was like, oh, I know this world, like I know I can go into the game and like find all the areas and stuff, and like I now have all the visual reference like right in front of me, and so I cranked out a bunch of like rough pages, and then Sean was like, hey, you know what, like because I think I'd knocked him out before the other guys even got anything going, and he's like, do you want us to do the whole book, like just lay it all
Wow.
out? And I was like, sure, man, like that's awesome. So I got to lay out the entire book, just rough layouts, but it was it was a great like storytelling like exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Taking the script and like turning it into like sequential like roughs, and yeah, it was just, and Sean was just great to work with, and um, yeah, that was sort of like that kind of got me hooked again like into comics after I did that.
Can I ask what
Um,
year this is, just to get an idea? Because I know you said the game studio was kind of in that iPhone boom, and then this was kind of after. I'm
mhm.
just curious for
Yeah, yeah. I'm
context.
trying to figure myself. So let's see. I'm I'm turning 46 next month. So I'm
Oh,
gonna
happy
say it
birthday!
was. Thanks, thanks. Uh, see, I was probably 37, so 9 years ago.
Mm.
So I think the Warcraft book came out in 2017. So I want to say this might have been or 2018. No, 2017 maybe. So it might have been 2016. I think that lines up somewhere in there. 2016, 2015, somewhere in there is when I
Okay.
was working on that stuff. And that was part of my like taking on the odd like freelance job while I'm doing video games. So I was laying
Mm,
out that I
okay.
was laying out that
Okay.
book while I was working on my video game stuff. Um, and then I was doing like I had a pretty good like steady freelance gig with a studio in Vancouver that was doing video games, and that was sort of a nice little part-time gig that kind of
Yeah.
helped me pay the bills. And so um, I basically, so I've been doing quote unquote chibi art, not knowing it for a while, because in our video games we do what's called a game sprite, and a
Yeah.
game sprite, so they read on screen. You're usually like 3 heads tall, 2.5 heads tall, kind of proportions. And just as like kind of a bit of a goof, I think it was during one of the first Inktober's I participated in. I had done some like sort of my own, I guess, game sprite or chibi version of. I think I did like a Mario and a Metroid, and that sort of like, and I think I did a Boba Fett as well. It was just like,
Mm.
and sort of like, I was like, oh, like they were kind of getting likes. I started posting stuff on Instagram and things like that. I'm like, oh, people kind of dig these like game sprite things. And then people like later on when they started doing the more like full colored ones, I think it was the following year, October after that, probably 2017 is when I
Mm-hmm.
did a lot of like chibi stuff during that Inktober. It was sort of like that was where I was starting to find that chibi style.
Mm.
That was during Inktober, and then I was like, after Inktober was over, I'm like, oh, I kind of like these designs. I'm going to clean them up and color them. And I did that with a few of the designs, and they kind of really kind of popped off on
Yeah.
social media. And that sort of was like interesting because I'm like, oh, now I'm building like a bit of a following. And at the
Wow.
time, I'm still working like at my video game studio, but I'm like, I can kind of use this to kind of maybe promote our games and stuff. Like, I
Yeah.
think it was up to like 30,000 followers back
Oh
then.
wow.
So it was a nice little like explosion. And it happened relatively quick, like within 6 months, the first 6 months, and then the next 6 months, I think it was over like 100,000 followers. Like
Wow.
it was like probably like 100,000, 120,000 followers in like a year from
Wow.
like posts and that kind of stuff. Um, just yeah, it just took off. Like it was just I was posting like it was back before algorithms really had taken over, so it wasn't
Yeah.
really algorithm based. Wasn't even like maybe little hashtags were starting to be used. You're trying to figure out things like
Mm.
that, but um, I was just like I posted at the same time every day, and that sort of worked. And
Mm.
I posted these sort of chibi drawings and yeah, so I was really just growing my social media following.
Did you
And
have a plan of where that was leading? Like in your mind, did you know that this was gonna like help you build out? No.
the only thing I thought at the time was I'm like I can use this to promote my video game studio. That was really
Wow.
my motivation at the time. However, it was around the time of my social media boom where we had realized that like we're not going to be able to finish this game. Like and we pretty much have to go get jobs. Like that was kind of the thing.
So that
It
game
was
never came out.
no, no, it never
Damn.
did. Yeah, it was a lot. It was like a good year and a half worth of work, and it was just.
Wow.
But it was still we needed another year and a half, 2 years
And
at
the money
least.
just wasn't there.
No, because it was like I said, I had a kid. I just had my first kid around that time, and I'm like, I need to pay bills. Like
Damn, dude.
it was getting hairy, right? So I'm like,
It's
it was
getting dicey.
unfortunate, but you know what? Like here's the thing too. I think 5 years of struggling, and Melvin and me like we're still really good friends today, but I think it was hurting our friendship a bit. It was you
Wow.
sort of just start to you're working close quarters with somebody, you're not being all that successful, you're making mistakes a lot, and
Yeah.
you're sort of like I don't know. It just definitely tests a friendship for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and we tried to do some remote stuff after I had my first kid. I had to be at home. We tried working remote, but it was still we were struggling, and that's when we sort of decided. I think it was kind of like a mutual thing. We both realized it was time to give this up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of a bit of a relief to be honest, because it was a big weight on my like lifted off my shoulders to like and I
Not
had
have
sort
that.
of yeah, and my freelance stuff was still like it was going pretty good,
Yeah.
so I wasn't too worried. I was like I can focus more on that. I was able to focus more on making fan art, and building up my social media. So this is the time when I stopped Halfbot, and then this like I think it was like around January of 2018 where Hasbro and no, so it was Marvel first. Marvel would contact me, an art director from Marvel, and 2 weeks later, Hasbro contacted me, and they both wanted me to do work for them based off this chibi style. And Marvel was a big one because they wanted me to do their whole like toddler line.
Okay,
Like
I was gonna
basically,
ask, what was it? Was it like T-shirts? Because I've heard you say like it was the freelance. Can you say what those projects were?
yeah, yeah. So essentially, what they told me to do was, so they had done they had sort of a bit of a chibi-esque style previously for their toddler stuff, but they were looking to, they're always like every like 5 years or so, they kind of recycle the art out and they
Yeah.
put in like a fresh new look. And so I guess they tapped me to design their fresh new look for the toddler brand stuff. So this was Superhero Adventures was the sort of name of it.
Nice.
Like if you go on like Disney Plus right now and you look up the Superhero Adventures cartoon, you see my splash art is like
Oh
on
wow.
the little icon. So basically, like all they had me tasked me to do probably like 60 characters, maybe 70. It was a lot of poses, like a lot of different poses, and they would go into a style guide. That style guide would go out
Mm,
to every toy company, every like manufacturer of like anything Marvel for kids stuff. So it
yeah.
would go on backpacks and bedspreads and like underwear and t-shirts and everything.
Wow.
The downside to that is you don't get any of that money. You just
Yeah.
get paid initially for your design.
Dang.
But it was decent money. I mean, I'll say I don't care. So it was like $500 US a design for
Okay.
per
Okay.
pose, which is good money. I mean, especially then, like I was like, um,
Wait, you see mean propose like if you make a design sheet and it has like five poses, it's like 500 each. Whoa.
yeah,
Wow. I've never heard that before. That's crazy.
yeah, it's good money.
Wow,
It was good
dude.
money. Because it would take about like 3 to 4 hours, especially if I already had the design established. Like it could
Yeah.
go faster, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a little longer on that first one,
Yeah.
but once you kind of had the look, and I knew, okay, this is the look I'm going to do. And it was sort of basically that look was a bit of a hybrid of my current chibi style. They didn't want it so chibi. They were sort of like maybe not so chibi, and they didn't want the three finger look.
Okay. That makes sense.
And yeah, so that was great. I mean, that gig lasted probably like 2.5 years, and it was pretty good. But but eventually it was just kind of like, all right, we're done with you. They didn't really say you're done with me. They just kind of like, I don't know. It's like when you're getting broken up with a girl and she just kind of like, you know, just stops calling, stops answering the phone kind of thing. A little bit like a little cold, Marvel,
Oh
but
man.
it's all good. They get. I mean, again, it was a good opportunity, and like Hasbro, like it tapped me, like I said, like it was like 2 weeks after that. So I was juggling Hasbro, like designing toys for Hasbro at the same time as doing
Wow.
that stuff. Within like I think 6 months of that, DC had tapped me to do their toddler brand, just
Whoa.
totally, just because of the stuff online, not because I was doing stuff for Marvel,
Because it hadn't
just
been put
because
out yet.
yeah, like I mean, it was just like the fact that like yeah, my chibi stuff had sort of like caught their eye, and I ended up doing a
Wow.
different, totally different sort of chibi style for them. So it was kind of cool to get to do like Batman and Superman in totally different style, and then do like my Spider Man in a different one.
Of
So that was kind
course.
of fun. I got to do like doing the Marvel stuff. I was doing some kids books, illustrating some kids books from that stuff, which is pretty good. And that was back when Disney was still publishing the books. I think they stopped doing that, and the money kind of dried up. They don't pay nearly as much now as they used to. Some of
I
those
feel
jobs.
it.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean that was like So let's see, like yeah, the chibi stuff gave me a lot of work, but then it became this time when like and I've done a lot of toy design stuff from it, but I didn't want to become the chibi guy.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that's I've always kind of I don't know being maybe somebody who prided themselves on being versatile.
Yeah.
I also felt like I couldn't just stick with one thing all the time. Like
Yeah.
I'm sort of always trying to evolve my style or evolve my look, try different things, try different brushes, try different like
Yeah.
tools, like materials, like try to learn something new. Like I get real bored
Yeah.
and doing the same thing over and over again. And I want to get better. That's another too. Like, I always want to get better. Like I never feel like I'm good enough. Like
Did you
I'm
feel like
always
you were
like
getting stuck? Like, because when I looked at like your chibi stuff, doing like research and looking at the your Instagram, like going as far down as I could, and it seemed like you were always mixing. Like you've always been really good at like never. Like it never seemed like you were over exploiting the chibi stuff, even if it was working for you.
right.
So how long into doing the chibi stuff did you kind of feel like, okay, I need to do even less? Because I always felt like when I looked at it, you were very like good at making sure I wouldn't have seen you that way. I knew it was an element, but Like, how long did that take for you to be like, I don't want to be that guy?
I think probably about 2 years of it, like two
Okay.
years of it. I was like, well, here's the other thing too. Is like, so art theft started to become a big like problem. Like,
Oh wow.
I was getting ripped off like a lot, and
Damn.
that was like, uh, I think that that definitely played a factor. Like in that stuff, I mean, it's one of those things. Like, Eric Kennedy uh, said this thing about my art one time because I met him in Toronto at a comic convention. He came up and he's like, you know what, dude? He's like, this stuff's like candy. He's like, he doesn't want to kind of eat it. And it was like the funniest thing, but like, it was the perfect kind of description of the art because
That's
it
so
was kind of
true.
like this shiny little
Yeah.
pieces of like, and so I mean, because they're like that, they're like, okay, yeah, they might look cool on a t-shirt here and there and stuff, but they
Yeah.
popped up like my artwork was popping up like every corner of the globe. People send me pictures from like Peru, like, hey, this shop has your, Darth Vader on the shirt, and
Oh my
stuff like
gosh.
that. And the, it's like, I was getting like, at one point I was getting probably like 5 or 6 messages a day from people saying like, hey, this guy's still in your art. This thing's still in your art. It was like, I'm like, don't even tell me. Like, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to deal with it. It was like, and you realize like after like the first couple, you try to take them down. You realize like you just pop it back up again. Like, even if you like went to like a T villain or one of these type of sites, or whatever, and you like get them to like take it down, you have to like fill out a form and like do all the stuff. And then like yeah, and then like the next week they're starting a new shop, and within
Damn.
the or whatever, you start a new user thing, they're popping up again. Like, there's nothing really you can do to stop it. Like, that's the
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
Ultimately, and especially like the thing was too, I was sort of like, I was starting to get this sort of feeling of like, when it comes to fan art, um I always kind of felt weird about selling fan art. There
Yeah.
was
Of
always a bit
course.
of me that was like, I'm like, I'm like, I don't own these characters,
Yeah.
and it kind of felt like easy. Like, it was like
Mm.
kind of easy to sell. Like, it was like you go to convention and like it was easy to sell the stuff at the convention because
Yeah.
everybody wanted, um, and you'd see other artists and stuff maybe not selling fan art and they'd be struggling, and then I'm like making hand over fist money, like selling these things, and I'm like, I don't know. It just, but it felt like kind of like, I don't know. There was just something about it that kind of it was eating away at me a little bit.
Yeah.
And it was sort of kind of like, so that compounded with the art theft, and also just not wanting to be like, pigeonholed as like
The chibi guy.
the the chibi guy. And there's a lot of people like, and this isn't a bad thing, but there's a lot of people like copying my style and like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
For sure.
and stuff like that. And I mean, which is cool. I mean, it's flattering and all, but start to see like, kids that are like trying to learn based on like my stuff. And I'm like, like, you don't want to really learn to draw on chibi stuff. Like, it's, it's really
Yeah.
deformed and doesn't really teach you fundamentals.
Yeah.
I'd even made a video, I think, of how to copy properly on YouTube, just because I wanted to show people like, you can still copy somebody's art without copying.
Yeah.
Um, and, but, yeah, I think all that sort of like led to me going like, you know what, I need to do more things for myself, like
Yeah.
in stuff I own.
Yeah.
And I done some more comic work with Cheeks after World of Warcraft. I worked with Cheeks a little bit when I was trying to get my freelance footing. I worked
Hmm.
with him with his Table Taffy Studios for about a year and a half. Had a lot of great opportunities through that. I helped him do a Batman Black and White short story.
Oh wow.
Right?
I
Yeah,
didn't know
right.
you
Like,
did one of those.
yeah. Well, it was like I had the ink and credit on it.
Mm.
And so that was cool. And then same thing with a Superman Adventures of Superman story he'd done. I got to help out on that, so that was just really cool. I got to do like a couple of covers, like I did, I think one for like Star Wars Rebels, when they did like Star Wars Adventures. I
Oh
did a
okay.
cover for that. So like, through Sean, it was kind of like nice to sort of like, he was kind of getting me back into comics a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
Um, and that's when I was like, I really need to start getting back into comics. And I'd sort of like, for a long time, I was afraid to write something.
Mm.
Probably goes back to being in school and not being like a good reader, and like struggling through like English, and like it was never a strong suit, and I was
Yeah.
always afraid to write something. And but now I'm like, it was like my late 30s. I'm like, I've read a lot of stuff now.
Yeah.
I've researched some stuff. I'm like, I'm not a complete idiot anymore. I can maybe piece together a story. I'm not a great writer. I'm still not, but I could do it well enough to sort of do something that I could like put on paper
Of
and like turn
course.
into and I'm like, I just need to do this. And I started with Rune World.
Mm.
I did a page. I just as a test. I did a test page, threw it up, kind of see what kind of response people were going to give it.
Yeah.
Because at the time I was still posting chibi stuff and getting like, it's a weird thing, weird psychological thing when you're posting art and it gets a lot of likes, and then you post something different and it gets
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
half the likes or a quarter of the likes, and you go like, like, is this? There's a little bit shot to your ego.
Yeah.
And I that was a big thing I had to overcome as I transitioned away from like fan art stuff and
Yeah.
started doing more of my own things. I had to like lose that feeling of that dopamine hit of like seeing a lot of likes on something. I really had to, you know, sort of,
Push
get it right in
past
my
it.
head. Yeah, get it right in my head that like it's okay. Like, this is okay. This is just, people will come around. You know what I mean?
Yeah, can I ask about that? Because now
Yeah.
you have so much success outside of that. Like especially now, I really view you based more so on your like you had the Mouse Comic Project and like Ruin World and the newest one you've done, the what's it
Crimson
called?
Fall.
Yeah, Crimson Fall. Like I see you so much based on your own stuff. Has it like matched now where if you do like an Iron Man drawing and then you go back to posting Crimson Fall, like does it match to where you feel more comfortable, or is there still like a pretty big discrepancy?
I found that like my design stuff now, like, or like if I was to put it can sometimes get more.
Oh
Like,
wow. Sick.
yeah. So like I think I've turned my audience. It took a few years, but I was
Okay.
able to turn them. We're almost, I think people would be disappointed sometimes when I posted fan art.
Of
Like it
course.
almost like there
Yeah.
was a time when like I'd post some fan art. I'm like, oh, this didn't get as much likes as I thought it might get.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's kind of interesting the way your audience kind of shifts around, right?
Yeah.
Because like new people will come on because they saw something they liked, right?
Yes.
And they'll
Yeah.
they'll attach themselves, and then if you're not drawing that thing they like,
Yeah.
well, they might not like it or engage, but then again they might. Um and yeah, um so what was I saying? So like, yeah, basically getting into comics again. Um and with Rune World, it was sort of my proving ground. I
Yeah.
finished a first issue, and I was like, if I can just do an issue, like a
Hmm.
full 20 pages, um, and then I'll just see like if I can just do this, and I'm happy with it, and
Yeah.
I really wanted to polish it. And I had printed like, I think I printed 300 of them myself, and sold them on my website, and they sold out pretty quick. I think
Wow.
within like a month. I think I sold like a month or two of that first issue, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm onto something here,
Yeah.
self-publishing, and I can make a few bucks,
Yeah.
and and but then I also was like kind of going like, oh, maybe I should try to get published. Even though I
Oh yeah.
self-published that
Yeah.
first issue, part of me goes like, oh, I need to break into the industry a little bit. Still had that little bit of a feeling where I needed to kind of like,
Need
I
that
don't know,
validation.
the validation, right? Like you see all your like art friends who are like working with Marvel, DC, and like Image and stuff, and you kind of want that. There's a little bit.
Yeah.
You go to conventions, and like the guys in the pro section of the convention, you're like, I'm not in the pro section, like,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And there's I don't know. Again, I think maybe it's ego.
Yeah.
There's definitely ego that plays a factor.
Yeah.
I can't even pretend it doesn't play a factor in my art career.
Of course. Yeah.
And so yeah, so anyway, I got lucky. I talked to, I think it was like Skybound at the time. It wasn't really something they were doing any all ages stuff, but they were encouraging. And then I submitted to Boom Studios.
Oh
I
nice.
forget. I forget. I think I knew somebody who had contact there. I forget who it was, and then they put me in contact with Whitney Leopard, who was an editor at the time at Boom, and so she kind of championed the book for me. She liked it, and she pitched it internally for me. Um, and I had the first issue done, so it was kind of proof of concept that I could get it done. And I'd had another issue written, and then like I for them I needed to plan out the 5 issue series. They needed like give me a paragraph on each issue, to
Yeah.
round out the series. So yeah, so that was just really lucky. I got picked up there. They gave me a. It was interesting. I kind of learned a little bit about the comic industry and stuff. I didn't have a name in the comic industry. Meanwhile, I had all these like followers online,
Yeah.
but it's like they don't in the comic world. It's almost like this whole different world. It's kind of
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
And they ended up having me do a short story for Adventure Time, and I think it was just so they could basically, when they put out a presser, they could say like Derek Laufman from Adventure Time, like you know what
Dang.
I mean?
Yeah.
Also it was just I think they liked my work and they wanted to see how I could do with this thing. But I
Yeah.
think it was interesting to see. I'm like, oh, they're using that as like a sort of way to sort of like say like, oh, he's done something,
Yeah.
you know, um, and yeah, so that was kind of like my first like sort of published work there was Rune World with Boom, and it was pretty good, but I think at the time, all ages comics, especially the singles, not a lot of kids going to comic book shops.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
At the time it was like 2017, and when the first issues came out, and it was yeah, it was a little bit disheartening. It did okay. I think the first issue sold like 7,300 copies, which for an all ages book, I was looking at like trying to chart stats and see where it landed with other all ages stuff. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, we're outselling Garfield and, different stuff like other all ages stuff. And, but it was like, it wasn't like in the 10,000s. Like, that was kind of like if you hit the like 10, 15,000 sort of range, I think it was a little bit more promising.
Yeah. Can I
I also
ask?
learned,
Oh,
yeah,
what?
yeah, go.
Because I mean, I remember 2017. That's when I started like really getting into art, and I remember at that time, not floppies for sure, but the kids' graphic novels and the all ages graphic novels were like cooking. So, was there ever a conversation around like? Because to me, it just seems like a formatting issue less than about the art and the story. Like if you had been coming out with 100 pages at a time, because I remember those books were flying at the time, like the Scholastic wave.
Yeah,
Was that ever
yeah.
a conversation?
It was. So the idea was we'd put out the graphic novel that the following year they wanted to put out the floppies.
Hmm.
And but here's the thing, and I realized later I actually had a little candid conversation with my editor who now left Boom, and she kind of let me know that at the time, even when I jumped on, they were sort of getting out of the kid lit sort of
Mm,
scene. So
okay.
I think they weren't pushing it as much. And by the time the graphic novel came out, it didn't get the push I was hoping for.
Dang.
I thought it was going to be like a really, that was because that was the market for it, was the
Yeah.
graphic novel market, and they didn't give it the push it wanted. So that was a bummer because I was just hoping. I'm like, well, the floppies didn't do great. They did okay, but I'm like, when the graphic novel hits, I'm like,
Yeah.
that's when we're going to make the money.
Yeah.
And then it was just like, didn't sell that many. I'm like, I remember thinking like in that first year, I think they sold like 800 copies. And I'm like,
Dang.
I can sell 800 copies
For
like on my
sure.
website. You know what I mean? Like this is
Yeah.
bullshit. Like I was just like, what are you doing? Like I was disappointed for sure in how that was sort of, done. And, it would have been nice to sort of like really see how it could have done in that market. I don't know what I don't know the inner workings of how they push things in that space.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was a bummer. But and maybe that sort of made me go like to where you know seeing my book kind of like do okay, but not good enough to do more,
Yeah.
and made me go like, what? If I just do my own and publish it myself, I
Yeah.
can make just as much money publishing it myself because I had a following,
Yeah.
because I built up that audience. I'm like, I can sell as much, print it myself, own it, and through Kickstarter, through my online store. and I can sell these at conventions that I go to. I don't go to a ton, but the conventions I go to, I can sell books, I can move them. So and I'm like, these are things that like I can own all the property and stuff, and my kids, later, if I'm long after I'm dead, they can print the
Yeah.
stuff they want. Who knows?
Yeah.
Like if I make a series of books and stuff, they own that stuff, right? So it's
Yeah.
like stuff I can pass down and
Yeah.
yeah. So there's just like a motivation there to go like, what, I could do this on my own, and that
Yeah.
sort of got me into like self publishing.
Can I ask, just because like I love the real world stuff, and it to me, like it feels like very like iconic in the sense that the images stick with me, like kind of like Bone. Has there ever been a
Mm-hmm.
conversation to like, especially now with kind of like, seems like there'd probably be a fire sale. Has there ever been a conversation about getting your rights back from them to try and like get it? Because I feel like if Scholastic got a hold of it, it would just have a second life.
Yeah. So I have had that conversation.
Hmm.
I probably will uh, get it back.
Let's go.
Yeah, at some point, but
Let's
I
go.
won't get I won't get into the details. But
For sure. I'm hoping for that for you, man, because I feel like if that just was put that, and that's like the one thing about comics that I always get passionate about, is that it's so unfortunate is there's a lot of great work, but it doesn't get put in the right places, and then the people, stakeholders, the artists give up on it, when in reality it's like one or two tweaks in the formatting, and this thing could like really go, because the kids don't care how old it is, they just like cool stuff.
yeah, right. Yeah, and it's kind of timeless in that way, right? Like
Yeah.
it's kind of how I wrote it, where you can read it 20 years from now, it'll hold up. Like
Yeah.
it's not being in a fantasy world. It's timeless that way.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's definitely opportunities to maybe like get it published somewhere else. But even like if I just took it back and published it myself, like
Yeah.
you know. Um, and so that's always a possibility. And then if I do have the rights back, and maybe I'll do a couple more stories in it, even
Nice.
just like some short stories or something, just to kind of like play in that world again. But I mean, at the same time, I went on and created some other worlds too that like
Yeah.
I'm enjoying playing in,
Hmm.
and that was kind of the motivation, like knowing that I didn't own that world. I'm like, you know what, I'm like, I have other ideas. Like I'm never short on ideas. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Like my brain, like I'm firing all the time. Like it's just I have a like my Google Docs folders. Like it's just insane with like
Mm.
dumb story ideas. Like I have so many dumb bad stories that like like half baked stories are kind of my thing.
Man.
Um, and yeah, so I'm not no shortness on ideas. Um, it's funny, like sometimes I'll see somebody will say like, oh, like I've been like thinking about the story I wanted to make since I was a kid, and I'm like, for me that's so weird because I'm like, first of all, the ideas I had when I was younger, they're dog shit, and like I'm like, if I haven't come up with a better idea since I was a kid, like there's something wrong with that. Like I don't know, no. I mean, hey, there's a lot of successful people out there that have done stories that they had when they were kids, and maybe I just wasn't very smart as a kid, but it's like when I think back to like even just a teenager, some of the ideas I had, it was just like the dumbest, image comic ripoffs and stuff, like just derivative of things, and you know, um,
A lot of side
so
pouches, a lot of
a
pouches
lot,
and
a
guns.
lot of pouches, a lot of yeah. Where can I not draw feet? Yeah. you know, all the things back the image taught me how to avoid drawing feet. Just put a smoke cloud at the bottom. You don't have to draw the foot.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah. So yeah. So anyway, so that was my self-publishing sort of.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at the same time at your Instagram, because I like stacked a bunch of stuff that I wanted to ask, but the self publishing was a big part of it because ha- all right, I'll ask this question and then I'll try and like lead it into the next question. So now you have like a lot of followers. So do you still split your time between freelance and your own published, because you put out a lot of books now, like you turned the Inktober project into like a full comic, and Crimson Fall is a whole thing, you have the bot 9, is that what it is?
Yep.
And then it's like you're putting out do these books make enough that you don't have to work for other people now, or do you balance it out each? Oh, okay, for
No,
sure.
no. I mean, they sell decent, but it's not like so. So I support my family with my art,
Of course.
and I'm fortunate enough that like my wife was able to like when she went on her mat leave with our second child. I was like, I'm doing good enough. Like you can not have to go back to work. She got laid off while she was on mat leave, and I'm like, you don't have to go find another job.
Nice.
And and she was really wanting to embrace like being at home, and now she does like a ton. She just and the thing is too, I'm like, she works for me essentially. She does all my
Yeah.
shipping, all the accounting. She
Nice.
does all our investments. Like she's this like powerhouse behind the
Nice.
scenes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you can be full time, like Laufman Co. Laufman Company,
Yes.
kind of thing. She's the COO of that. So, um, and so because of that, and having kids is expensive, and
Yeah.
like, oh my god, like, um, and so I have to take on still freelance work. I usually work about part time freelance. Like I'd say, like I usually dedicate about 4 or 5 hours a day to freelance and stuff,
Okay. Oh wow, that's not bad at all.
and then I split my time. For a long time, I was working a lot of hours, especially during that time with the Rune World stuff.
Yeah.
And then I developed bursitis in my hip because I was sitting for like 10, 12
Whoa.
hours a day. And I'm
Yeah.
a big dude. So, like, putting the weight on my hip and also
Yeah.
just being in the same position, like I
Yeah.
would be drawing for hours and not shifting around in my chair, not getting up to stretch.
Yeah.
It was dumb. And and I've been dealing with bursitis for like 2 years. It's gotten better. It's gotten more manageable. I definitely have toned back my schedule. I don't sit at my desk as much.
Yeah.
Um, and even during October, I got a new chair for my drawing table. So I'll switch between this. This is like my sort of digital station. And I'll go just over to my drawing table, and I can sit there. And just shifting how I'm sitting helps
Yeah.
throughout the day. I've found. Or I'll do like say like I'll go to the couch and sit and do like rough work, like rough layouts and stuff like that on my. I have like a digital ink sort of like a. It's called a Rada Supernote.
Yeah, I've
It's
seen
kind of
that.
like
You're the
a.
only person I've ever seen drawn on one
Oh,
of those. I
really?
thought, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a cool little thing. I got it for free. One of the benefits of having followers is you can reach out to some companies and go, "Hey, do you want me to try out your product?" And I'll let you know.
Ah,
So it's like a $500 device that I got for free.
nice.
So there is some benefits to having a following in that
Yeah.
regard, and I do milk it once in a while. Um, but yeah, it's a great device, and it actually is good. So I don't mind mentioning it because I'm like
Yeah.
I actually do like drawing because it's like it takes the like it really boils down. Like they only give you like a limited amount of brushes. You only get like three different
Mm,
tones you can use for your shading, and it's great for rough sketching, like just planning
nice.
out like layouts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I really enjoy drawing on for that. So I'll just take that to the couch and like do some sketches on that, and then I can like throw it up on Dropbox. Then I pop that up my computer, and draw over top of that. So that was kind of a way of like kind of minimizing the time I spend like putting weight on the hip in
Yeah.
the area.
Yeah.
Um, but I've had like cortisone shots, like 3 cortisone shots in my hip. Like it
Damn.
was like to the point where I'm like, these cortisone shots aren't even working, so I'm going to stop doing that. Um, and yeah, so the yeah, so what was I saying? I forget. I lost my train of thought.
Well, I know the initial question we were going over, like kind of how you, and if you have a hard stop, let me know because I know we didn't
No, I
talk.
don't.
Oh, okay, because I'm
No, it's
enjoying
all good.
talking to you. You like, there's
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah. We
many
talked.
things,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Keep going. Keep going.
for
It's all good.
sure, I think the initial thing was asking like, how do you split your day? Because I asked this because the podcast is geared towards artist, creator, die. But one of the things I'm really trying to like push is independent artistry. Like people, like you create your own products, you go to the conventions,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that there's so much out there about how to get a job that I think the other side of it is how do you build stuff for yourself, and especially with the layoffs going on right now that are crazy. I think that I just kind of want to maybe try and like show, because I don't think I understood so much how many things were possible. And when I look at you, and now the little bit older I am, I understand what you're doing a little bit better. And I'm like, oh wow, I wish I had understood, like, working after your day job to like make a comic and to put in that extra work. Cause like you said, if one of these things take off, your kids can eat off that. And
Yeah.
as an artist, you get so caught up on day rate that you forget that there's a higher form of income, which is like equity and ownership. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so I always just want to try and highlight how people are being independent so that like listeners can embrace that themselves.
So yeah, so I'll break down how I do it,
Okay.
and so okay, so just first and foremost, somebody that I looked up to for this was Jake Parker.
Nice.
He diversifies a lot of his incomes, like he's got a lot of income streams.
Yeah.
So I think as an artist, a couple things. Okay, so let's say you're starting out. Let's say your portfolio is good enough that you could get work somewhere.
Yeah.
I would say definitely a studio, getting into a studio if you can do it
Yeah.
is key when you're starting out. And the reason I say that is because being around other talented people can be crucial to your growth as an artist.
Definitely.
And when you're in your room, like stuck in your little space in your own little world, not being challenged, like when you're at a studio job, you might get challenged to do something that you wouldn't normally just pick up and do, right?
Yeah.
They need you to do this like box art thing for this thing, or they need you to do this character design, they need to do a background, whatever. When you're in a studio, hopefully it's a studio that allows you to sort of like, flex and learn a little bit about, try something else, fail at something, like, um, and I think that's crucial for new artists that are kind of trying to build themselves up. And I mean, you can do remote stuff. It's not the same. I mean, if you happen to be in a position where there's a studio and they have a studio, you can go work there. I think that's key. There are a few bigger cities that have sort of independent studios where you can be an independent artist. You maybe buy in some studio space and you can go in there. If you happen to be lucky like that, like if I live in Toronto or something like that coming up, I would have liked that. I know there's like a Rave Studio in Toronto
Yeah.
is an amazing space for that, and I know there's a few others around. If you can get into something like that, if the opportunity doesn't have to like go into a studio to actually like work in a studio, being around other creatives I think is really important when you're young.
Yeah.
When you're old like me, like you can kind of become a hermit now. Like I'm kind of a little more comfortable with that. But my younger self, I'd be like, don't get your ass in the studio for sure,
Yeah.
if you can. So that's the first thing: get in a studio job, and then make sure that like your evenings and your weekends that you're working on your own stuff.
Yeah.
Because that was my mistake when I went to Big Blue Bubbles. That I for the first 3 years of working there, I did not. And I came home and watched TV and wasted a lot of time,
Yeah.
even if you're just doodling in front of the TV, anything. Um, it's more beneficial for you in the long run. It's a
Yeah.
good time for you to maybe like draw something that you're not drawing at work. You know what I mean? Like work
Mhm.
on those comics or work on that style that maybe you want to perfect, or like try something different. The other thing is too, I would say like for this, and this goes for any stage of art, I recommend trying different styles. Like just
Yeah.
take a day and go, I'm going to try this thing. I like this. I like what this manga's doing over here. I like what this Mike Mignola is doing with Hellboy. I like, maybe what this watercolor artist is doing over here. Try some stuff. Like just see, you might just find that like, oh, something really clicks. You know what I mean? It might
Yeah.
help elevate you to another level. Um, so okay, so we're talking about revenue streams and everything like that. So first of all, when you have a studio job, I mean, most likely, if it's a good studio, you're getting money,
Yeah.
and then you can kind of like put out some little independent things, and the things you're doing in the evenings and weekends.
Yeah.
That's when you can start building up. Like that's your social media following, because
Yeah.
a lot of stuff you're working on at work, you're not going to be able to share
Yeah.
with anybody. So you want stuff that you could like put out there, because putting your work out there is key for like building yourself over the long run. You
Yeah.
have to put your work out there. Just start building the fan base. It takes time. In this day and age, the social media platforms change so much with the introduction of algorithms, and it's a lot harder to get noticed
Yeah.
than it was years ago. but you have to keep with it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like at the end of the day, like, you put out your best stuff and somebody's going to notice, hopefully,
Yeah.
and that might lead to a side job. And that's something too, taking on like a side job here and there, while you're working at a studio. Make sure your studio is okay with it first, because some studios are kind of dicks and they don't want you doing other stuff. But
Yeah.
like, try to see, if you can finagle yourself to like be, if you're putting stuff out there on social media, there's a good chance that a company might hit you up and go, hey, we need this cover, when you want you to do a character design for us, something you kind of knock out on the side.
Yeah.
When you get home from work, say you get home at 6, I mean, you can work for 3 hours in the evening, and 3 hours is a good amount of time to get something done,
Yeah.
you know, over the course of a couple nights or something, if you had a little side job.
Yeah.
Taking a, Saturday afternoon and just kind of plowing through, and then maybe doing for a few more hours in the evening.
Yeah.
As like I said, I was turning 46 next month. I work every day.
Yeah.
I don't take a day off, because it's like, that's another thing too. The hustle is, you have to, I may not work a full day all the time,
Yeah.
but I'm working every day.
Yeah.
And I find for me, and this doesn't work for everyone, I try to, like, when I'm doing my freelance stuff at home, I knock it out first thing.
Yeah.
Because if for some reason I can't get going, like say like in the morning, and like, I need to churn out some stuff for a client, and it's not really working, at least have the afternoon to fall back. If I'm like, okay, you need to, like, sometimes you just don't have it. I don't know about you, but like some days I'm just like, I'm drawing. I'm like, I don't even know. I forget how to draw sometimes,
Yeah. For
you
sure.
hit those times. So you leave yourself that sort of little bit of a, because I think when you're dealing with client work, most important thing is you have to be on time.
Yes. Yeah. For sure.
Communication, being on time, so important. You don't want to be late with stuff. You don't want to forget. Because if they're going to have you back, if those art directors are going to hire you again,
Yeah.
it's going to be because you're reliable.
Yeah.
The people that aren't even necessarily the most talented, if they're reliable,
Yeah.
they'll get the job over somebody else who just flakes on them.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so like I said, so I would get a studio job, or get some sort of regular paying thing that can support you enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then social media, like using like your own art that you're making, whether it's fan art, and fan art can be a great way, like, to build up your following. Throwing a fan art piece in here and there just helps to kind of like, bring in new people.
Yeah.
So don't shy away from fan art. There might be a time when you become sick of it, like I was a little bit. But it is definitely a way in to get some people, eyeballs on stuff. So then on top of that, all the stuff you're doing on your own, like whether, all the stuff you're creating, whether you're going to put it like a zine on your own, put on your website, there's some cheap ways to go about it. Kickstarter, I mean, is a great platform, or Indiegogo, or one of those platforms to like get your stuff going. I mean, raise a few bucks to at least cover the printing costs.
Yeah.
Do a low run. There's a lot of different options out there now for like printing stuff. Whether it's overseas, or you might even look around like locally, you might find somebody you can like do like 200-300 books or something.
Yeah.
Of something, or whatever. Start producing things, like start making things. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a few prints on your website, like get an online store going. Because even if it's not making a ton of money, it's good to at least get you sort of like figuring out how it's all works. Because at some point, like with an art, like in your art career, it might be like a year from now, it could be 5 years from now. Maybe you start to like really something clicks with people, and you start to blow up. Well, now you know how to sell stuff, right? You know how to do the website stuff. You know how to post stuff and sell it and like ship it. You got to you got to start getting into that, because I know a lot of artists are super talented, have no clue how to put something out there.
Yeah.
And I'll shout at these people. I'll be like, man, if you could figure that out, so it's so I think that's key. Like Patreon is not a bad thing either, but I do recommend you probably have a bit of a following before you start Patreon, because it's a struggle, even just when you have following, to get people over there. Like it's still a struggle. Interesting thing I'll say about Patreon, this is a little bit of like gripe I have. It's so funny. Like every time you post something, like every time I have like 200 followers on there, 200 backers or patrons. every time I post something, somebody drops off every time. And I'm like, man, this hurts. It hurts because like I'm about to give you guys content, and I post something, and people bounce, and I'm like, oh, that's the worst. But and so you got to kind of constantly promote your Patreon. It's kind of annoying because you got to promote to bring new people in because people are bouncing every time you're posting something. It's almost like they remember they're supporting you, and they're like,
forgot to unsubscribe to that.
yeah, I was only gonna do that for a month. You're like, shit. But no, but for the people that stick around, thank you. You guys are awesome. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, it's finding those things. So it's like having an online store, having something like a Patreon, looking at stuff like Kickstarter, going to conventions also can be a good way to sort of make some extra cash and kind of get you into like feeling that. And then yeah, it's just building and building and like building these things up and knowing that like at some point you'll have these jumps and breakthroughs. And this is what I'll say to like young artists. You'll have these like every little while, like you'll have this little bump and like this little like jump in your art quality. Well, something will click, right? And I think that's why like I always suggest like trying other things and pushing yourself maybe outside of your comfort zone. Draw those things that like say you struggle at hands, like literally like people say like it, but nobody really does it. Is like grab a sketchbook or whatever and draw hands for a weekend, just a weekend. Just be like, this weekend I'm drawing hands, and next week I'm drawing feet. And do that. I need to do that more. Like I don't do it enough. But it's like that stuff that like fundamentals and stuff like never losing sight of the fundamentals of drawing. I think I think it's easy to lose focus on like what's the building, what's the structure of your drawing, like what's the underpinnings of your work, what makes it hold up so it's not gonna like you probably have seen a lot of artists where you're like they kind of got their style down, but you look at it and you're like, that's wrong. There's a lot of wrong going on there, and it's not because it's like it's a stylistic choice. It's because they don't know any better.
They don't have those forms down.
Right. And that's like one of those things where like, working, even if it's not working on personal projects, work on bettering your skills when even if you're at a studio, work on bettering your skills outside of that studio. But yeah, so as far as revenue streams and stuff like YouTube channels, I mean, people can make, if you got a personality and you don't mind being in front of camera, use that. You had a voice that like, I'm not comfortable in front of camera, so I don't have a YouTube channel. I'm not one of those, I'm not pretty to look at. Like, I don't like, I'm not great. Like, but if like, no, I ramble. I'm not good at like putting together videos, but if I was a little more like, inclined to do that, there's a great opportunity for people out there to like share ideas and thoughts about art and, put it on a podcast, like things like this. There's ways to like, utilize your interests and monetize it maybe. And even if this isn't like necessarily monetizing in the way that you're going to make money on the podcast, but this is going to bring people to be like, oh, I'm going to check out your art. Right. Like it's another way, like any of these little ways to get people to look. Because getting people to look, eyeballs are so important in this day and age, right? And whatever can kind of bring in an audience, bring in eyeballs, even if it's a few things here and there, even if it's like, back in the day, like you could just like make little zines and like if you're at a comic convention, you like hand them out to people or something, make little like, business cards or like little things. Like I would make like in my early days of like comic conventions, when I had a booth, I would do these little postcards instead of business card. Because it would have my website on it, and it would just be a nice piece of like little 5x7 artwork. And then you hand that out to people. And I'd see people who put that, they show me a picture of like from their convention, they like be pinning it on their wall. And then my website's on. It's like little marketing tools and stuff like that. You need to think of like, how can I market myself? Like put my artwork out there. And there's so many things that like, I'm not into TikTok and stuff. There's other platforms that like come and go. And I think it's important for like new artists to like embrace that stuff. You never know where you're going to find like, where your work will pop off. But I would also say don't stick to just one platform. I post on like 4 or 5, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter or X or whatever. Yeah, yeah. So, and I'm posting there, and I post pretty regular still, and
Yeah,
it's a grind at times. Sometimes I just go days without posting because I don't want to because I'm sick of it.
yeah,
Um, but I try to sort of like, even if it's just a bump, like, stuff in my store, or just like, here's another thing too about social media. I've realized like over the years is that don't be afraid to repost things because
yeah, yeah,
people don't see stuff like
yeah,
the amount of your audience, like the way the algorithms work nowadays. I might get, I think 10% of my Instagram audience actually sees my post.
yeah,
It gets a sad sort of number when you look at
yeah.
like you see the metrics and you're like, oh, 10% of my audience saw this.
That's crazy. That's
You know what I mean?
insane.
And you can't tap your whole audience.
Yeah,
So you got to just keep, reposting and hope people, see it.
yeah. Because it might be a new 10% out of that like 100 each time,
Yeah.
and they get a kick out of it. They don't know it's like the third or fourth time that you've posted it. So yeah, that's a good one. One thing I wanted to ask you about, because we were talking about comics, is something that I'm kind of like refalling in love with these last couple of years, and I'm trying to kind of get my first real one going. And one of the things I also noticed that you do and a lot of other social media business savvy guys do is you have like the Crimson Fall visual development right behind you. Are you making that because you know there's like a secondary like effect that it can have on the comic, where you have something to post, you can build up the story of you making this comic, and
Mm-hmm.
then people feel a part of that process? Or would you naturally be doing that if other people weren't going to see it?
Yeah. So I would do it regardless, but
Uh-huh.
I do recognize that it's stuff that I can post. And to be honest, a lot of times the concept art will get more likes than the actual pages.
Yeah.
Like it's like something like I find like the one thing about posting a comic page, and I think this is just because of the scrolling nature of people on like social media.
Yeah.
If it doesn't like capture them right away,
Yeah.
like you got a bunch of panels, a bunch of stuff going on.
Yeah.
They just want to go on to the next post, right? Like
Yeah.
so, when you have like maybe just a character design, you might find that character design is going to get more likes than something
Mm-hmm.
else,
Mm-hmm.
but it does at least bring awareness to
Mm-hmm.
your project. And
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it helps them along the journey. There are people that enjoy seeing those processes behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That's why like, posting the process stuff is always been helpful for me. Like just in kind of getting that stuff out there. Um, I mean, I also use this. So, like, this is one thing that Jake Parker had said a few years ago. He was like, try to, when you're creating a piece of art, try to think about like, how many different ways can I monetize this piece that I'm
Mm.
doing?
Yeah.
So, say I'm doing that stuff you see behind me there.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can post it like, well, for one, it's good because I'm having references for my own comic to keep
Yes.
my stuff on model
Yeah.
helps. So that's huge, and just figuring out the characters and stuff that's a big benefit. So secondary benefit to that is I post on social media,
Mm-hmm.
therefore possibly bringing in more followers, or at least appeasing my current followers, getting them interested in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I will then post the stuff on Patreon and maybe even a more in-depth behind the scenes look at like what the
Mm.
roughs are that go into those poses. I might do like a video or something of me making some of the stuff. So monetizing that way. I mean, that would be great if you had a YouTube channel or something. You utilize that to like post some of the behind the scenes stuff. And Daniel Warren Johnson's great for that.
Yeah.
So and then I put that stuff into an art book usually.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yep.
So then, and I put out, this will be my sixth art book that's coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Currently on the Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
Little plug. And so, yeah, so it's like how many different ways can you monetize that art? But it's
Yeah.
like you're doing it because I'm not doing it to monetize it, but I'm looking at what are other ways I can
Yes.
use this.
Yeah.
And there should always be, and if you're thinking as a businessman, because essentially we are like,
Yes. Yeah. For
business
sure.
business business people. Like so, you have to be thinking about your business and how you're going to grow your brand. I mean, you are a brand. I mean, at the end of the day, as an artist, you become your own brand.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to self-publish or put your own things out there.
Yeah.
Like, really, it's like who you are.
Yeah.
Like, is a big part of it. And that's where I think like a lot of people that have like those YouTube channels and stuff, and podcasts, like, you're putting more yourself out there, which I think is good. Like, I think that's good. I wish, like, again, I wish I was better at that stuff because I don't put myself out there a lot.
Yeah, but
But
I
that's why I have
mean,
people like you that have me on their podcasts and then like
exactly.
do
And you're also
that.
really good at it because I think that to a certain degree, a lot of especially artists would rather be like you where the art can speak for itself so much. And because I know for me, I just kind of I started the podcast because I struggle with a lot of that other stuff. And so I'm like, in my head, I'm always like, God, I just wish my drawings could do it so I could just focus on that. But like you said, part of being a business person is figuring out your lane. Like you said, you don't really like to put yourself out there, but there's 1,000 people who should be putting themselves out there. And so part of that road to kind of independence and building your own brand is just finding what works for you. You happen to be one of those people that, like, you don't need a podcast. You don't need like a crazy YouTube channel. Like, anyone who looks at your art and the amount of art that you put out every week is like, it's enough. So everybody's different.
Yeah, and that's and like going back to like talking about how like what people should be doing to like build it. Like it's like literally like I'm gonna say like these are things I do,
Yeah.
but those aren't going to be the things that necessarily you got to do. I think it's
Hmm.
important to listen to these type of things, like listen to podcasts with other artists and stuff, and
Yeah.
see what they're doing because everybody's doing something a little different.
Yeah.
And the one person's path, like I mean every artist you'll talk to will have a different path to get to
Yeah.
where they're going. And the through line for almost every single artist is going to be that every artist struggled,
Yeah.
right? Every artist is trying to get better no matter where
Yes.
they are along their way. They're trying to improve. And you know and I think that's and you probably, out of all the artists, if you look at all the artists that you like, you'll probably notice that most of them have not become complacent,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And even when something was working for them, they're still like doing some other
For
things.
sure.
And I think that's important, to be versatile, because the industry is always changing, and it's going to be changing even more with this whole AI stuff coming along, and things are going to change more.
Yeah.
Probably more so than ever. I would say, like with the emergence of AI art and stuff, um, self-publishing and having your own thing with your own voice,
Yeah.
people, I think those are going to be the things. And maybe 20 years from now they might become like vinyl records, where like you get the odd collector who wants to find, oh, what was this done by somebody who actually did it all themselves. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
For sure.
But it may become a bit of a relic, but there will be a market for it, right? Like I'm just saying, like, so building your own things, I
Yeah.
think, is super important in the landscape of what the future of art could be. And I
Yes.
think having a human touch on things are going to be like a big standout, right? Like that's going to
Yeah.
become a thing. Like I joked around one time, I don't know if it was a podcast or something, but like I like, if you like have to put like on your book or whatever, made entirely by a human, like stamp it on there, as like a sort of like, you start seeing that in the marketplace. That's gonna be a scary day.
Yeah.
But because that might be a thing people are looking for, right? Like there
Yeah.
might be that thing where it's like, knowing, and maybe that's like, I don't know, like it pushes me towards like even wanting to be less digital
Yeah.
nowadays.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
Is like that almost, because I've and that's another thing too. Like I don't know, for young artists and stuff, the AI stuff out there, I think it's going to be a weird trap of like, if you start becoming reliant on AI art to help
Yes.
you,
Yes.
I think it's going to make you super lazy as an artist.
Yes.
And you might be able to quote unquote produce some nice looking things
Yeah.
with the assistance of AI. But ultimately, as an artist, are you going to be better for it?
Yeah.
And in a world where, like, say, AI art becomes the thing that they can just snap out a design or whatever without you,
Yeah.
even if you are using it as your assistant, you'll be replaced quick. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like in that span, if you're like one of the artists now, you're like, hey, I'm gonna learn to use this thing because I don't want to get swept up in it. But understand that, like, when that AI doesn't need you anymore,
Yeah.
because at some point it may not,
Yeah.
then what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Because you don't know how to draw because you've been like relying so
Exactly.
much on, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like or like your skills have slumped
Yeah.
because you went down this path,
Yeah.
and it's like it might be a quick path to make money or whatever. You might see it that way, but I'm thinking in the long term, you're going to be better off as an artist if you can actually do the things.
Yeah.
And that's something too. Like I think original art, selling original art at some point is going to become a bigger market. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and having that hand touch on things, like having those flaws and having those things, are
Yeah.
going to be like, that's an important aspect. So anyway, this for new artists, something to think about. Like, it's not something like I don't know. It's like so weird because AI is like hasn't been around that long,
Yeah.
but it's like I haven't had time to put a ton of thought into like how this is going to change the landscape of things.
Yeah.
But like I know somebody who works in the film industry doing concept art, and I was talking to him like a couple weeks ago, and he's working on a production for like a big budget movie, and he was saying it's like him, an AI artist, and like I think a graphic designer or something, and the three of them are like working on doing concepts for this thing,
Yeah.
and he's like, the AI will churn out a bunch of crap, but he's like, and then they'll have me refine stuff, or they'll have me like, okay, it's kind of like this, but you go do like the good version,
Yeah.
right? But I'm like, even that, I'm like, you're working on this pre-production. There's three of you. I'm like, what would have been 5 years from now? Like 5 years ago, he's like, it probably would have been 20 people, 15, 20
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
he's like, those jobs are already snatched up, and
Yeah.
that's just in the first like the last year or two, right?
Yeah.
So the jobs are getting snatched up, and
Yeah.
it's definitely it's gonna be a downward slide.
Yeah.
I don't want to make anybody bummed out, but it's not looking good for artists, especially if you're a concept artist.
Well, definitely on
Um,
the concept side, because even for my job, I know for a fact that like I don't always see it, but to a certain degree, because I work in commercial animation, and
okay.
there's different aspects of the job that I think AI is like getting stuff going, even as a mood board, and then
Hmm.
we're taking it later on and then putting our touch on it after. And in some ways, it is really good because we can kind of like move past like the part of the job where we have to like constantly talk about, like, you know how like in the initial sketches when there's no art, you guys, someone might describe something to you and it takes like, a handful of drawing, which is weeks or a week of drawing just
Hmm.
to get to like a first base where we understand what we're both mean when we say we're going to draw a room in purple light or something like that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so, but the one thing I will say about AI is that from what I feel like I've seen, it's moving so fast that I think people are getting tired of it a lot faster than I think anyone else would have thought. And I do think that what you were saying at the beginning is actually more true, which is even part of the reason why I think I started like getting into your work as much as I was, because like I don't think anyone was prepared for how much an AI artist can flood a website with art to the point that no one even cares anymore, and they're not the
Right.
only one, and there's like 2 dozen people like fucking with Midjourney can make an entire website go like just like they're on everything and no one cares anymore. And so like the one thing
Right.
that feels cool is that like no one can, even if someone AI is Derek Laufman, it's not gonna, it just doesn't work. And so I do feel like being able to draw and being able to do the real shit is gonna like still be king, because man, I'm already over it. Like the novelty is gone and it's been less than
But
a
now,
year.
yeah.
And
Well, yeah, and that's certainly. I mean, the fad of it. Yeah, it does, and it waters down like
mhm.
the industry. And I think it, if anything, like the side of the industry that takes the biggest hit is that sort of digital painting side. Like
Yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of the, because that's the stuff that's been
yeah,
mimicked the most.
yeah, for sure.
Harder to mimic sort of cartooning and things. I haven't seen a ton of that,
Yes.
but yeah, like I think you're right. Like I can see people getting over it quick, and I think the danger of it um, is in the production side of things. Like you said, when you're talking about even your own studio, um, where they're cutting out that process. And although it's a lengthier process, there is something that gets lost
Yeah.
because there is that when you have like an artist working on something and they're working through the problems and they're taking time and developing it, they're
Yeah.
thinking about it, they're living through it,
Hmm.
and they're bringing more to it. Like, even if
Oh
it's
no.
just like your own knowledge as an artist on that project, if you've gone through that struggle of like a couple weeks of figuring it out,
Oh, you cut out for a
there's,
second.
oh, sorry. So what I was saying was, if you're like an artist who,
Mhm.
if you're going through that process, that like say a couple week process, you're saying that maybe the AI cut out, right? And
Yeah.
you're going through that struggle of finding it, like
Yeah.
finding that thing. There's something I'm saying you're losing like that because you're gonna like you work on that thing for 2 weeks, but you're really thinking about the process. You're really thinking about the project. You're getting your head into the project more,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
That.
So it's like
Yeah.
you're living in it.
That's so
If
true.
the AI can just churn it out,
Yeah.
it's like I don't need to think about it. Like I don't
Yeah.
even need to think about that shit. It'll just churn it out, and it's like you're losing that
Yeah.
like the creativity that's lost. And there might be like imagine how many ideas happen during those 2 weeks
Yes.
of somebody struggling where they're like, hey, you know what, I got a really cool idea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I've
Yeah.
been in this project for 2 weeks now, and I got
Yeah.
this really cool thing that make this better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that I think that's the stuff that gets lost. And I mean, certainly before even AI, we had mood boards, right? Like you could go to
Yeah.
Pinterest. I do that. Like for a project, sometimes like I would go to Pinterest and look through a bunch of stuff and find things that kind of speak to me, like in terms of like shape or design or color, or different things to kind of help wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
And I understand how AI can kind of churn out that mood board pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But again, when I'm looking, just by looking, I see other
Yeah.
things that go, hey, that's another idea.
Yeah.
Or that's something I wasn't thinking about. Or I came across this other artist. There's things that get lost
Yeah.
when the computer's doing it for you. And I think that's one thing that we're sort of maybe hopefully will realize is how much we're losing during that process.
Yes.
Although the companies look at the bottom line and they go, hey, we didn't have to spend 2 weeks paying this artist to do this thing.
Yeah.
But then again, that's like, and it sucks, but it's like that's 2 less weeks that like that artist might be on that job later or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
or less jobs taken up because they, churned out this AI stuff. So um, that's the reality though. Like, I mean, you're not going to stop corporate greed. Like corporate greed's always going to trump everything. Like we
Yeah.
know that, right? Like
Yeah.
it's, when you're dealing with like those big studios and they just want to make that money
Yeah.
and get the project, and the consumer wants the project out, right? Like they want the next show out, they want the
Yeah.
next, they don't care how it comes out,
Yeah.
they just want the thing, right? And they don't care, like, I mean, the quality even sometimes like of these shows, like they're looking at Marvel stuff, like so many Marvel shows, there's even some of the Star Wars shows and stuff, like some of the quality just dipped, like super dipped,
Hardcore.
because
Like
they're
it's
just pump
crazy.
just pump this shit out, and then like
Yeah.
hopefully you might get an episode where you're like, hey, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
I mean, that sucks for a
Yeah.
show that you should love.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I'm getting an episode where I'm like, oh, I kind of like this moment
Yeah.
that that happened in the episode, or this one cool scene or whatever. And and that sucks though, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like people out there making real art and not just churning it out.
Yeah.
Like that's where the good stuff is, and that's where like the independent comic scene,
Yeah.
like when you have somebody who's like really passionate about their work
Yeah.
and they're pouring everything into it.
Yeah.
Oh man, I love that. I'll pick up a graphic novel any day than watch a Marvel show,
Yeah. For sure.
or whatever,
Yeah.
a Disney show, like, because oh my god, like even if it's not perfect, like there's just something there that I just love to like eat up.
Yeah.
Like it's just that person like pouring everything into it,
Yeah.
and I don't know. And that's why like independent books, like, even more so than even studio books, because
Yeah.
I know when it's like done independently, when that creator has done every choice,
Yeah.
like every marking on that page, every word dialogue,
Yeah.
they made that choice.
Yeah.
And there's something really cool about that.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
Like, there wasn't even an editor to tell them because they couldn't afford no editor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
like, and so yeah, that's why I like to eat up like independent stuff. Just, I'll go to like TCAF in Toronto, which is like Toronto
Oh yeah.
Comics and Art. Oh, it's the best. It's my favorite show.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even like Comic Cons that much.
Yeah.
I'll go sell stuff there, but I don't want to be there as a fan.
Yeah.
But like these Toronto Comics and Arts Festival, like, oh my god, just go around seeing all this stuff, and it's all just like people with their little designs, scenes, and stuff, like,
Yeah.
and or just stuff they print themselves, and like, oh, it's like it's so good. Like it's just
Yeah.
like it's so good to see these people out there making stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
it's raw.
Yeah.
Like there's, you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
rawness that you get.
Yeah.
And yeah, man. So that's why I think about. I don't know. That's why I focus.
Yeah. I
You got
think.
more questions? Keep going.
Yeah. Well, I just want to reiterate something you just said that I thought was mind blowing is, and I think is super true is the fact that like that time that you spend with the stuff, because sometimes you think so much about the immediacy, but I don't. You're so right about like the time that you have to sit with stuff really you don't realize you're internalizing so many things and choices, and you're getting into the world and you're trying to visualize it, and if you just crank it out and you think you want that speed, you think you wish you were a faster artist, and you should be as fast as you can be, but sometimes like you can't take for granted that time that things marinate, and when you do finally eat it, it tastes better than McDonald's or whatever. But yeah, like sitting on stuff, so
That's
many
a
I
good analogy. McDonald's versus like a real meal you cooked yourself. It's
exactly.
like McDonald's could taste good, but you eat
Yeah.
McDonald's every day, you just don't want it no more. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's
It's good in a
crazy.
pinch. In a
Yeah.
pinch, man. You're on the road, you need McDonald's, but like,
Yeah.
it's nowhere near as good as you make your own
Got
food.
to chef it up every once in a while. But yeah, man. Yeah, that was I think I have more questions.
Yeah, go for it.
The independent stuff was definitely like the biggest stuff that I like that I really wanted to like kind of learn about how you thought about stuff. And then I'm just looking through, making sure I hit all the major points, because through you telling your
Sure.
story, kind of passed through some of the questions I would have asked. Yeah. Oh, you know what? I did actually want to ask this. You have you've already talked about it. So like I know Jake Parker and I know Sean Galloway. Like
Mhm.
those are kind of some of the people that inspired you to kind of do what you're doing and be who you are. What are the who are some of the people that inspired you? You can say those again. What did you learn from them? And yeah, I'm sure a lot of people can get a lot out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, Jake was big for the business side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously I love his art as
Mm-hmm.
well, but he's so prolific.
Yeah.
Um, and that's something I really admired, and seeing the way he tackled, turning his art into a business.
Yeah.
I think it's like really something that resonated with me. Um, Sean, for his like just endless like talent and creativity, and that guy, like, just like, he was back making his own books at like one time, was super inspiring. But he's such a good designer, and just such a good dude, and like, so big inspiration there. Seeing what Scotty Young has done, like when he
Mm-hmm.
went and did like the Oz book,
Yeah.
like adapting that, like that was so cool. And then I Hate Fairyland, I was such a big fan of that. I got to do a short for him for his Substack, and I think it's going to come out. I think it's sometime. I think it's this year. My little short
Nice.
story I did for that. It's super cool of him. Let me do that. And so like I think some big inspirations though for my independent stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Smith, who does is Barbarian Lord,
Okay.
that was a big one. And Andrew McLean for Headlopper,
Oh
seeing
yeah.
him, like,
Yeah.
I think like just seeing the artist writer like combos, like these people that do it all themselves,
Yeah.
was like putting out these like amazing stuff.
Yeah.
I even got like my Andrew McLean shirt on.
Nice. I was wondering. I thought, oh man, he's the
Yeah, yeah,
goat, dude.
yeah, he's best. He's such a good dude. And Crom, who you just had on recently,
Mm-hmm.
like yeah, like just seeing like Raiders and Bird King, and like, oh my god, it's like so cool. And like those guys just really inspire me,
Mm-hmm.
like and like I think like Andrew and Crom stand out because their style is so different than what I would do.
Yeah.
Like it's removed from what I am, but like just something like just something special about somebody who does their own thing
Yeah. Yeah.
and so well.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, it's almost like that thing where like you always hear about like artists like learn the fundamentals before you break the rules.
Yeah.
And those guys like they know, you know, that they know their fundamentals, and
Yeah.
then they go and kind of break the rules sometimes.
Yes.
And it's cool to see like, you know, just how they convey like storytelling through their visuals,
Yes.
and the way they'll like create a panel out of like just sometimes like just a little blob of like just perfectly, you know, put on the like in the panel with the negative space, and you're like, oh, they nailed it. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's the finesse it takes
Yeah.
to like do, you know what I mean? So yeah, I mean that I'm trying to think who else, like so many like artists, Becky Cloonan,
Oh
like
yeah.
powerhouse of an artist, just like
For sure.
everything she does is like so good. I have a lot of stuff. I have like next to my table here, I have this book stand.
Mm-hmm.
So like, you know, Heron for like propaganda,
Nice.
right? Like I'll pull some other stuff out of here. Keep handy. I always keep my like Hellboy, like
Oh
short
yeah. Of
story
course.
stuff, because so many good artists in there.
Yeah.
And this artist, I don't think a lot of people know Fabian Mentz.
Oh
So
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
But like this book's in
Oh,
like, it's
nice.
in French, but like
Yeah.
I don't care because the visuals, just like this
So
guy's
good.
storytelling. The storytelling of this guy, like it's insane. Like look at that, it's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah.
You know, so I keep that stuff handy. This guy, I can't say his name properly, but like I wanted Lucky Luke, this artist,
Oh, okay. Once a lucky.
so good. Like look at this stuff. Look at this palette. Like it's
Oh, that's
so.
amazing.
I don't know if people are gonna want to see this stuff on the show, but
That French
uh,
wave.
yeah. Oh, and this another Sam Bosma, like fantasy sports.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he's so good. I got like one of his prints on my wall behind me there. That one there, the city.
Nice.
And yeah, so like so many artists. Like I take, you know, um, Michael Walsh, who did Silver Coin,
Okay.
like so talented Hamilton artist, not too far from here, Canadian boy. Yeah, there's just so many artists out there that inspire me, like,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that's the thing. Like sometimes I get a little overwhelmed because these guys are doing it so well,
Yeah.
and I'm like, man, I need to get, but it's kind of lights a fire under me. I'm like, I need to get better with my stuff, right?
Yeah.
I need to make this as good as it can be. And then there's going back to Jake. Jake said this thing in one of his, I think it was a YouTube channel one time. He said like "finished, not perfect" was like this sort of little mantra. He said
Yeah.
that helped a ton through Rune World, because Rune World being my first book, I was making a ton of mistakes throughout it. But I'm like, I need to get it done, and
Yes.
finishing stuff is so important.
Yes.
Um, you know, I know we were going to talk a little bit about doing independent books and stuff. So I'd say like rolling into that, um, keep your project small.
Okay.
Um, Big daunting books. Like if you're like envisioning like my first book, like, you know, Rune World being 120 pages, that was a little too big,
That's too
to be
big.
honest.
Okay.
It was too big for my first like real like diving in, doing it all.
Yeah.
Because I messed up some stuff along the way. Like I look back at it now and I go, I would have planned this better. If I knew better, I would have planned it out better.
Yeah.
Some of the story arcs kind
Yeah.
of got rushed.
Did you feel like you didn't have the whole story wrapped in your head, so you couldn't plant certain? Is that what it is?
I had it. I had it there. I knew I was going to end it.
Uh-huh.
Like from the beginning, I knew how I was going to end it.
Mm-hmm.
I just the meat in the middle.
Yeah.
I didn't know how. Like there was moments that I needed to tell in the story that I wanted to tell that I maybe had to rush because I only have so many pages.
Yeah.
That I can tell these things. Plus, you're like, you know, when you're thinking about making comics, you always got to think about the page turn. You want like something new to happen on that page turn.
Yeah.
So when you're planning out, like sometimes it's like I got 2 pages to tell this little bit of an arc,
Yeah.
you know, for this character arc or wrap up this thing. And when I would have liked to have 3 or 4 pages or 5 pages, you know, it's like those type of moments where moments end up getting squished and squashed because you're like, I have to fit it in.
Yeah.
You know, especially that's when you're doing your published book and they're expecting it to be X amount of, you know, this issue is going to be this many pages. So
Yeah.
I was beholden to that page count.
Yeah.
And that did factor into how little bits of story had to be edited or switched around or taken out.
Yeah.
You know, so had I, you know, tackled something like that now, I would really want to plan out, break it down, even like not necessarily have to be page by page, but I'd at least want a blurb for every page to
Yeah.
really understand what's going to go
Mm.
on every page.
Okay.
Because I was just doing basic outlines for each issue with like a paragraph outline when I first had to submit it.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, issue 3, this are going to happen. I've wrote it out and they know this is going to happen. It's going to lead to this. But it's like, oh shit, like I have to tell this in like 5 pages and I only got this.
Yeah.
You're trying to juggle around like
Yeah.
breaking down your script and what the important moments are.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of that where I feel like execution wise, it would have been better if I had more experience under my belt before I did something that big.
Yeah.
I find like, again, finishing stuff is important, right? Especially when you're starting out, because it builds your confidence.
Yeah.
You learn from every project. You're going to learn something. You're going to take away something, things you would have changed or done better. So when you're knocking out small projects, like say rather than have like 100-page graphic novel,
Yeah.
if you had 3 like 30, 40-page graphic novels, you're going to learn so much more telling that story.
Yeah.
Like, and you're trying to like tell a story in 30 pages, like an
Yeah.
actual like nice like beginning end, bam bam. Like it's not easy to do, but it's a good exercise in storytelling. And then, it's really, if you're doing 100 pages, all you're doing is you're taking that 30-page thing and you're expanding it to 100. You're going, okay, I can fill out the meat in the middle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's, I would just say like, for, up and coming artists, but I like those exercises just on my own anyway. Like I prefer a smaller project, get in, get out. That's why like I'll work on a Crimson Fall story, but then I also have like Rats of Ironwood, which is a follow up to the Witch of Wickerson world that I'm working on because I might get bored after doing a 40-page story for Crimson Fall, and
Yeah.
then I'll go and I'll bounce back to the other one and do that
Yeah.
for a bit, and it just sort of keeps me on my toes
Yeah.
a little bit.
Of course.
So yeah.
That's cool. And so how many cuz yeah, you have a lot of different IPs if that's what we want to call them, but different comics.
Sure.
How many are you juggling at one time, cuz it seems like a lot of times we'll be getting visual development for one while you're still posting layouts and thumbnails or pages for the other. So how many do you juggle at a time?
So usually I'll work on one for like a few months, and
Mm-hmm.
then if I hit a creative wall, I'll bounce to the other one.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, but I'll still post things that were like development images for maybe another book, like just to kind of keep it in people's minds that it's
Yeah,
out there and I'm working on it. Um, like Rats of Ironwood is a bigger story, and that one's going to be a while before I can get it finished because I
yeah.
do work on stuff part time. And my next project I'm trying to finish is the next Crimson Fall story.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, so that one I've been working on here and there for about a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was like um, it went through a few iterations. I'm still like storytelling wise, like I still struggle with the writing side of things at times.
Of course.
I want to get it right,
Yeah.
and I find like writing stories for me, it's like you have your character and they're going down a path, and then you're like, oh, but there's like infinite other paths. I can put them down that road.
Yeah.
Like having that like infinite, like sort of like, where can I go with this story thing sometimes becomes a hindrance when I'm
Yeah.
writing, because maybe an idea that I've done, I'm like, I like the idea, but then I'm like, oh, this shiny new idea came up, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, maybe I want to explore that a little further.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better if this happens or whatever. Or I'm like, maybe the story needs more action. I need to insert like something in here or whatever. So there's just little things that kind of come along, or it's like sometimes it's like something's just not right and I can't put my finger on it, so I'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay, like to do, but you don't want that to become like everything you're doing. Like it is important to finish some stuff,
Yes.
and maybe because I finished some things, I feel like I have a little more, leeway to sort of like
Bounce
okay,
back
now
and forth.
the next thing I can maybe take a little more time on because I have other books out there.
Yeah.
I don't have the urgency, I guess, to put stuff out as much.
Yeah.
But that can become bad too, because sometimes if somebody said to you like, I need this, book done in a month,
Yeah.
you're like, okay, I'm going to fit like and you have to finish it.
Yeah.
You will make those decisions and you'll live with those decisions, and then you'll have something done. So
Yeah.
sometimes there's like having that. That's where like Inktober, when I did The Witch of Wickerson,
Yeah.
I had to live and die because I was like putting out a page a day. So
Yeah.
I'm like, my decisions that I had made at the beginning in pre-production, I had to, because I gave myself 2 weeks of pre-production on that project, and the story changed vastly in those 2 weeks, like vastly
Wow.
changed. Like even my whole approach to the project changed like immensely in those 2 weeks. But by the time I was done at the end of 2 weeks, I had to live with that's the direction I'm going, and I have to go down that road, and I don't have a choice because I need to knock these pages out.
Yeah.
So, um, and I think it's like, um, yeah, I think that's just the doing the smaller projects, knocking stuff out, like sometimes giving yourself a timeline and saying I need to get it done by this time.
Yeah. Finish not perfect.
For Crimson Fall, Lambs of God, which was the first Crimson Fall story that I put out, I had done that to get it ready for TCAF last year. I had 6 pages done that I had done as like sort of like a test. Like it was sort of like I wanted to see this world and kind of feel it out.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked where it was going. I'm like, I should finish this. And TCAF was coming up. I needed a story for it. I wanted to have a new book out for TCAF.
Yeah.
And I had a short time frame. I knew I had to have like, I could get it printed locally. It would take about 2 weeks. So I'm like, I have like literally, I think it was at the time I had 3 weeks, and I had to finish
Dang.
like the rest of the book. I had 6 pages. I'm like, I have to write the rest of this and finish in 3 weeks. And I just like plowed through. I didn't like, that was a lot of time at the drawing table. My
Wow.
hip was killing me. But sometimes when you're under the gun like that,
You
you'll get
finish.
shit done. And
Yeah.
sometimes like it's good to almost like give yourself that thing. It's like I'm going to have this done for this date for whatever reason. Like TCAF was a great one because I just didn't want to show up with nothing new
Yeah.
because I had been the year previous, and the same thing will be coming up for this year where I have to finish another Crimson Fall story, and it'll be because of TCAF.
Yeah.
I know I need to hit a print window. I have to get my story done.
Yeah.
It'll light the fire under me. I'll get it done. I'll finish it. So that's another thing too. It's just like make sure you give yourself almost like these your own tight deadline and stick to it
Yeah.
and really like do it, because when you have that sort of like dark cloud over you, like pressuring you, like watch, you know what I mean, like that pressure.
Yeah. It really makes you actually go ahead and get shit done because, yeah. Yeah. Because you, especially your first time, I feel like you will really try to rework stuff because you're afraid that, like, this doesn't make sense. But at one point, it's like no one cares. Like, it's your first one, so no one's even really looking for it yet. So it's like just
Yeah,
finish.
yeah, just get it done, because you're not winning an Eisner on your first book. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like it's like in that sort of idea. I think that's important to sort of like not worry about. You know, each thing is going to be a building block
to the
to the
next.
next project.
Yeah,
And if you're stuck on the one project, you don't get to build that block, right? Like
yeah,
you're not going to learn as much if you're holding yourself like in that one project.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and also like you say too, when finding multiple uses for one piece of art, I think like there's a lot of people who maybe because of the social media side, a lot of people will never maybe read the book, but you're the process of creating and sharing, you're building a reputation with the audience as well as a person who makes comics. Even if they never read it, they see you making stuff and they might see
Mm-hmm.
you post the finished one. And so people view you as like a comic artist and someone who starts stuff and finish stuff and has worlds. So all of it is important.
And that follower might buy your thing out of pity. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of a weird thing to say, but like, even if it's not your best stuff,
Yeah.
you'll get people that just like, you know what, I've seen this person working on this thing, and I want to support them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and they're just along for the ride, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like, and they'll see your journey. They might have your first book that wasn't as good as your last book or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Like that's totally fine. Like, and
Yeah.
there's like if you look at Mike Mignola as a good example, like his first Hellboy stuff looks vastly different, right, than what
Yeah.
he came up with later.
Yeah.
And even along the path, I mean, it took him a long time to kind of refine his style to a point where he's like, I know I've gotten it down. I've refined it so much that I know exactly what Hellboy looks like
Of
now. I
course.
know how I want to draw him. It
Yes.
took him years to figure out how to draw him
Yes.
and how
Yeah.
to draw that world, right? Like he
Yeah.
was figuring it out. You can see, like, there's glimpses of what it became, but it
Yeah.
wasn't exactly that. It's not like, even for somebody who's as talented as he is, he didn't have it all figured out right away. He just went
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If he waited, then you would never have gotten what you got later on with Hellboy, right?
Yeah, that's very true. That's so true because, like you said, I mean, especially with him, because that's like a period of like more than a decade between. I mean, I think it was what 3 decades until he finished it. So it's like, it takes a long time to figure this stuff out, and you're never in this the complacency thing of. I'm pretty sure he was kind of older by the time he really started feeling like he was hitting his stride.
Right.
Yeah. For sure. Well, all right, man. I don't want to hold you too long. I really appreciate the discussion. I mean, a guy like you, I always have like so many directions I want to take the conversation. I mean, you started a game studio. You've become like this prolific independent artist with like worlds that people have actually like that people can recognize and are so dope. And so it's hard to find one thing and stick a conversation on it. But one thing I did want to ask, since you have kids, do your kids like your stuff? Are they fans? Are they Derek Laufman fans?
I mean, so they're 8 and 11, and both boys, and it's funny, like growing up with like a dad who can draw. Like for a long time, it was like there's like not they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Like dad can. They were like at one point. I remember my kids like all dads can draw. Like what's the it's like they don't even see it. I think it was like my older son. Like until his friends were like fans of my work, and they were like he
Wow.
was like they're like oh like your dad like that's your dad or something. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there was a little bit. It was like, oh, they're hitting him a little bit. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, you're like kind of famous at my school, like or different things like
Wow.
that. Like it was kind of like a weird little thing. I'm like, I'm not famous at all. Like, because it's not even that's not fame, and like, but but from their sort of like in their perspective, in their world, I think just growing up with like you know your dad can draw thing, they're not that interested in art. My youngest son's starting to get a little more interested,
Yeah.
but I've never forced art on them.
Of course.
I've just always kind of been like, if you want to draw, like I'll show you some stuff. Like, if you want
Yeah.
to, my older son, when he's got like an art project, I might get a little too like hands on. Where I'm like, okay, redraw that like head and like do this thing. Like I might get a little bit like, and he kind of gets annoyed with me. So it's almost like a good like he might have a better piece at the end because he
Yeah.
worked really hard. I'll be like, I'm going to show you how to do an underdrawing, and you're going to lightbox this thing, and like
Oh my
I'm showing
gosh.
him like but he doesn't really care that much.
Yeah.
But he'll be happy at the end. But it's like the process. He doesn't love the process,
Yeah.
and you got to love the process, right? Like
Yes.
it's like, and that's the difference. Like I have a niece who's 17, and she's been like drawing every day. Like she draws more than I draw. Like it's insane,
Wow.
and she's so good. Like her realism is so
Yeah.
much better than me. Like it's
Yeah.
insane, and but that's the thing. She loves it. She lives it.
Yeah.
Like it's literally her life.
Yeah.
Like if you see her, she's drawing,
Yeah.
and that is something like it's like if my kids ever want to be that, like it's like I'll help you along the way, but I never wanted to push it on them,
Of course.
because art's something you need to really want to do,
Yes.
because it takes so much of you.
Yes.
Like art takes everything, right?
Yeah.
Like it's everything. You pour your everything into it.
Yeah.
If you really want, not to say you can't do art casually and have a good time, but if you're like art's going to be my career, my life, you
Yeah.
pour everything into it,
One
right? So
hundred percent.
you got to really want it. It's not something you just do as your side gig.
Yeah.
I'll just be an artist. It's not like that. You can't just, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna be a musician. I'll just go, it's like it's any art job, like anything. Like, I mean, you can't just be like, I'm gonna be a doctor. You got to work. The shit takes work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's yeah.
Well, I'm happy to hear that they understand that their dad is doing some cool shit and a lot of people look up to him. So as long as they know that, I think that any kid can respect that people look up to their dad and people find inspiration and people want to listen to them on podcasts. And so, I think it's cool. But man, thank you so much for just coming on, being willing to talk about all manner of stuff, being willing to break down your career and how you view it. And yeah, just thank you. I appreciate it. You've been very candid.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Anytime you want to do it again, we can do it again, like 6 months from now or something. You want to do another one?
Yes. Yes, I would love that.